Hi everyone, welcome back to Economics by Arsha, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about market failure. However, before I start, I would like to let you know that I'm going to make market failure another series by breaking it up into 4 to 5 subtopics as their own individual videos. So stay tuned for the full playlist soon. Now, let's get right into it. So what is a market failure? Well, in the real world, markets do not function perfectly. That is, they are not allocatively efficient. Instead, multiple factors prevent resources from being allocated optimally. This reduces community surplus and is called a market failure. This has an adverse effect on stakeholders involved, as it results in a manifestation of externalities. Now, externalities are essentially when the production or consumption of a good or service has an effect upon a third party. And by third party, I mean any of these three: the producer, the consumer, or society. Thus, a negative externality occurs when the effect on the third party is harmful. Now, let's take a look at some key terminology that we'll be using when drawing our graphs. The first one is MSC, marginal social cost. This is defined as the cost that society pays as a result of the production of additional units of a product. Now, marginal social cost is not always monetary. It can also be measured as a cost to someone's mental, physical, or economic well-being, often to the well-being of an entire society. The second is MPC, marginal private cost. This is the cost that producers pay as a result of the production of additional units of a product, and is always monetary. The third is marginal social benefit, or MSB. Social benefit is the total benefit to society from consuming one additional unit of a good or service. And the final is MPB, marginal private benefit. This is defined as a single additional benefit that a consumer receives from consuming one additional unit of a good or service. So in today's video, I'm going to discuss negative externalities of consumption. Negative externalities of consumption is simply defined as an adverse effect on a third party arising from the consumption of a good or service. Often, the good or service in question is a demerit in nature. Now to clarify, demerit goods are goods that are harmful to consumers. Oftentimes, consumers are either unaware of or choose to ignore the possible risks associated with consuming the product. Furthermore, it is important to note that products are only considered to be demerit in nature if it harms the consumer. Take an example of petrol. Although its use has a negative impact on the environment, it does not harm the driver, thus it is not considered to be a demerit good. Now let's take a look at an example. Here we have the market for cigarettes, which is a demerit good, and we have two demand curves. The first one is labeled marginal social benefit, and the second, marginal private benefit. And we have a singular supply curve labeled marginal social cost. Now, when drawing a negative externalities of consumption diagram, in order to determine the market equilibrium point, it is merely where the marginal social cost curve and the marginal private benefit curve intersect, which is here. This gives us our market equilibrium price at $240 and our market equilibrium quantity at 50 packs of cigarettes. However, as you may have noticed, there is a distance between the marginal social benefit curve and the marginal private benefit curve. More specifically, the marginal private benefit curve is greater than that of MSB, and the distance between these two curves is known as a negative externality. This negative externality has two effects. One is on the consumer and the other one is on society. The negative externality on the consumer would be the health risks associated with consuming cigarettes, such as developing asthma or lung cancer. And to society, this could be the negative effects that occur due to secondhand or passive smoking. In order to illustrate this negative externality on the graph, we have to draw a triangle that is pointed towards the ideal optimum market equilibrium point, which is here, and this triangle is labeled as the welfare loss. Now, it is the job of governments to ensure that this welfare loss is eradicated. But how do we do that? Well, there are 4 methods for this. The first method is indirect taxes. The government could impose a Pigovian tax on the cigarettes in order to reduce the consumption. To clarify, a Pigovian tax is a tax imposed on any market that creates negative externalities in order to eliminate the externality. On our graph, the implementation of this tax would move the MSC curve upwards, giving us a new curve, MSC plus tax. This would shift the price of the product upwards to $300, but shift the quantity demanded down to only 40 packs of cigarettes. Thus, this gives us a new market equilibrium point here, and effectively eradicates our welfare loss. However, this method does have its drawbacks. This is because consumers of these goods tend to have inelastic demand due to their almost addiction to the good. Thus, implementing taxes would not be able to reduce the demand completely to the socially optimum level. Secondly, if the taxes are too high, consumers may be inclined to look for other sources of supply, such as traveling to neighbor jurisdictions with more lax policies, or purchasing them illegally. Lastly, such taxes are often regressive. Their intended effects only result in the low-income segment of the population. This is because the same tax would take up a larger portion of the income of a low-income individual relative to a wealthy consumer, and this raises issues of inequity. Now, the second method is legislation or regulation. This is another approach that entails the enforcement of certain laws to alter consumers' behavior, and is considered as a form of direct intervention. In our example of cigarettes, this may require a legal age restriction, bans on smoking in public spaces, or laws concerning the advertisement or packaging of cigarette products. However, these laws can be met with opposition, as such a method can be seen as restricting the rights of consumers to decide for themselves. Furthermore, such regulations may harm the business of producers in this market, and companies may even use their lobbying power and legal teams to prevent the enforcement of such laws. Thus, in order for this method to work, governments must ensure that they allocate resources to guarantee the cooperation of all stakeholders involved, and punish those who fail to do so. The third method is education and/or raising awareness. Oftentimes, in the real world, consumers don't necessarily have the perfect information of the damage demerit goods can cause to them and those around them. Thus, with the tax revenue gained from the Pigovian tax, this can be invested in providing awareness campaigns, advertisements, etc., in order to advise consumers against the consumption of the product. Nonetheless, it will be up to the consumer's discretion to accept this information and change their consumption patterns to a more healthier choice. This cannot be enforced by the government. Now, the fourth and final method is actually an HL concept, but SL students, you can definitely listen in. This is consumer nudges. According to behavioral economics, the lack of perfect information or herd behavior can result in consumers making irrational choices, which in the case of our example would be the overconsumption of cigarettes. Thus, consumer nudges, such as packaging cigarette packets with graphic images of the resultant effects of excessive smoking, may nudge consumers to make better, more healthier choices. Again, these strategies allow for the consumer's free will to choose, as it is in no way enforced but merely a nudge in the right direction. Now, returning to our example of the market for cigarettes. Using any of the 3 methods that I just mentioned, legislation, education, or consumer nudges, the primary goal of the government would be to make sure that marginal private benefit aligns with marginal social benefit. or that the marginal private benefit curve shifts to the left. This would mean that we have a new curve called marginal social benefit equals marginal private benefit, and this would effectively eradicate the negative externality and give us a new market equilibrium point here. This would give us an equilibrium price of $180 and a market equilibrium quantity of 40 packs of cigarettes. Hopefully, this new market equilibrium point will boost the community surplus and ensure the welfare of all consumers in society. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I hope it was informative. Stay tuned for my next video where I talk about common access resources. And please do leave a like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Bye!